But some of us either don't ride to work, or we want to do more than that. We want to go out training. Okay. So I'm going to give you some little bits and pieces of training advice and touch on some little scientific principles, just to sort of whet your appetite or encourage you to go and find a bit more information. Training. Well, training is obviously most important. If you're going to train, you need to have a bit of an idea of what you're doing. Every time you go out and do a ride or train, do any sort of training, really, it should be there for a purpose. So whether the purpose be, oh, I just want to go out today because it makes me feel better, or I want to go out today and ride 150k at this heart rate and at this speed or whatever, because it's an important key cornerstone of training block, blah blah blah, or even if it's just because just not lose weight. But it's always good to have a goal. Because, I think it's necessary to have a goal when you're training. So you need a program. You should, in your mind at least, some people have written programs, which are great. In your mind, you need some sort of idea of what you're doing and why you're doing it. Okay. So, talking more about, I guess, a more formalised training program here. Before you think about that, an training program could be, training agenda. It might be riding a bike once a week. It might be riding a bike 6 times a week. It depends on what your level of interest and commitment is. But to be able to put together a program, you need a goal. So it's really important to think about what do I want to achieve out of this. And for many bike riders, it could be, I want to ride the Tour of Manimal 2 because I've never ridden 120k before, and that's my goal. Some of you might be riding around the lake. Some of you might be riding the next Tour of Wellington or the Tour de France. So you need a goal, and generally it's an event, or it's a race, or it's or a tour, or just a ride that you want to do. And sometimes it's a number of these. Quite often it might be a series of events or a series of big rides or something like that. So that's an important part of the program, because everything's geared towards that. You need a time commitment or capability. If you haven't got any time, there's no point thinking you're going to improve and reach a goal. So you've got to make time. I believe you've got to make time for exercise, because it's really good for your health. Making time might be because you commute and that's your training, and that's a really easy one to do, I think, for people. You've got to have the time, or the capability of getting the time. And I suppose I'm guilty of having these grandiose plans, but really I don't have the availability of time, or I don't have the commitment, because I've got so many other things going on. I've got a good work ethic too, so that really means you've got to have the goal, you've got to have the capability, but you've got to be able to actually go out there and get up and do it, and that means getting up and riding in the cold morning, or not sitting your bike on the train to go home, but actually riding home. A really important part of that is, in addition to that, is though, you can't be too rigid with a training program. You've got to build in flexibility. You've got to understand that best laid plans of mice and men sometimes don't come to fruition. Sometimes you're going to get sick. Sometimes you're not going to be able to do your ride because you get a puncture and you have to get a lift home or something. And where a lot of athletes indeed fall down is that they don't build any flexibility into their program. They don't. If something goes wrong at all, if one little thing goes wrong, they fall to bits. Psychologically they fall to bits because they haven't followed the program. Well, programs are just rules, and rules are made to be broken. You have to understand that sometimes you just can't do what you want to do. And the best athletes, the best athletes are the ones that can say, okay, well, that's life, let's just get on with it and get back to where we are, where we can. So with a training program, you need to build in flexibility. So if your training program is I'm going to ride 3 days a week, the flexibility might be I'm going to ride every Monday, but then I'm only going to ride 2 days a week after that. It doesn't really matter which days I'm going to ride, but I'll just ride when I can. The flexibility might be, if you're riding 6 days a week, the flexibility might be, well, I can train in the morning or the afternoon, just whenever I can fit it in. Okay. Another important part about building a training program is you need some means of measuring and recording training load. I'll talk about this in a tick before I finish. But that means the duration of your ride. Sometimes that might be just a watch because it's time. Sometimes it might be miles or kilometres because you've got one of those things you stick on the front of your bike that measures how far you've been. intensity is a bit more difficult. Some of you might even have heart rate monitors, which is a method of measuring intensity. Some people might use speed. We've seen the problem with headwinds and tailwinds and using speed to measure intensity. Well, heart rate is also fraught with difficulty in understanding the cardiovascular response to different conditions. It is useful if you're going to use a heart rate. It's at the moment, of course, you need to buy consistent rate. When we talk about training, there's 4 things we have to think about. We have to think about the frequency of training, the intensity of training, the time of training, the type of training. These are all the variables. When we talk about frequency, we're talking about the number of training sessions you might do in a week. And ideally, if you want to improve your ability to ride a bicycle, and this relates to not only any sort of physical training, in fact any sort of training probably, it's to an extent the more training sessions you do, the better. But even probably more important than that, or just as important that is that it needs to be regular. What we're talking about is trying to adapt to become a better bicycle rider, and regular training is most important. The other thing we need to think about is intensity. Of course, the harder you ride, the faster well, I won't say the faster you go, but the harder you ride, the greater the effort. The more effort you put in, to an extent, the greater the rate at which your legs and your body are going to adapt, and you'll improve more quickly. There's different ways that we can measure it. So it's good if you have a bit of a handle on intensity. You can actually go too hard and overdo it, but to get a bit of a handle on intensity, you can measure your heart rate, you can measure your power if you've got some whiz-bang bicycle, you can measure your speed, I've just mentioned that, or you can think about how hard it is. And in fact, if anyone, including a very experienced cyclist, was going to ask me, Steve, what's the best way of measuring your intensity? I would say your rate of perceived exertion. And all that means is how you feel. How you feel is the sum of all the stress your body's under. It's the sum of your cardiovascular stress, which is your heart rate. It's the sum of the metabolic stress, which is how much your legs hurt because you're running out of life. It's the sum of all those things, and your thermoregulatory stress. And ultimately, the best bike riders and the most experienced bike riders, they know how hard they're going by how they feel. That's what gets to that. So the other one is of course duration. Now most of the time we can use just timing, just depending on what you want to get out of your training session. It might be just a constant work, a constant go and ride for 4 hours, or if you're really serious about it, you might do what we call interval training, where you go hard for maybe 30 seconds and then go rest for a minute, go hard for 30 seconds and rest for a minute. Okay, that starts getting more complicated, but again, that's a whole other story. Interval training is certain experience. The other thing we can talk about in terms of training is you don't always have to be riding your bike to train. I've learned as I've gotten a bit older that if I go out and do a bit of cross-country running, actually that's really good for keeping up my fitness. I'm not as fit as I used to be, and if I was as fit as I used to be, probably I would have been better riding my bicycle. But if I don't have time, if cycling or some cycling event is still my major goal, but yet I don't have time to go out riding, then going up and running out there in the hills is actually pretty good. It's a good alternative. But the best training for riding a bicycle is riding a bicycle. The best training for riding a mountain bike is riding a mountain bike. The best training for road riding is actually getting out there and riding on the road. In fact, cycling is so specific that if you want to train at a particular leg speed, a particular cadence and a particular power output, the best training for that cadence and that power output is that power output and that leg speed. Your body is remarkably specific in the way it adapts. So if you target a particular event, in fact the best thing you can do is go and do that event. Well, probably that's not necessarily true, but if you want to learn to ride at a particular leg speed, the best thing you can do is go out and just ride at that leg speed.